Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only, Silver the Hedgehog here, and I am back for the Lakes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more Let's Play of Sonic X Shadow Generations, while we're still experiencing Shadow Generations for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X/S, PC Steam, Nintendo Switch, plus Nintendo Switch 2, thanks to backwards compatibility has already been confirmed. So, last time, we essentially did manage able to explore into the next stage in the game, which appears to be Chaos Island, based off from Sonic Frontiers, not just by the forms of Act 1, but as well as Act 2 as well. In addition to that, we also did manage able to stumble across into Sonic the Hedgehog of all things, during the forms have been taking place in the actual white space hub world from Sonic Generations, despite the fact that obviously though it's just more likely like a cinematic cutscene. In addition to that, we also did manage able to tackle for more challenge acts, and so much so, we also managed able to realize that we actually got every single last boss keys to able to actually access to the next boss, which appears to be none other than Mephiles the Dark from Sonic 06. So, yeah, overall, pretty enjoyable fight to me though, especially unlike the forms of how it does it on Sonic 06, where sometimes the hit detection feels a bit wonky when it comes to trying to deal with all this demon monster stuff, but I digress. So today, for this video, is that this might actually be the grand finale. Well, not the forms of the entire game itself, obviously, but the entire story progression as far as this is concerned. We might able to actually approach onto the final stretch in terms of the story progression, because as you can tell, we're somehow standing right in front of the forms of, I would classify for saying, the final Doom Power little thing right here. And so much so, remember how during the forms of in Space Colony Arc Act 2, where we technically already learned the forms of one of those Doom Powers, which we somehow got wings? Well, fundamentally speaking, I was about the fact that I get the strong feeling that the final Doom Power is going to be involved around we're going to be able to fly around in places and stuff like that. So, and here's the thing though, unlike in the original Sonic Generations though, you probably already realized about the fact that we are no longer collecting Chaos Emeralds because that's only Sonic's job. Not just for classic Sonic, but also modern Sonic as well. So, yeah, I guess that makes it totally obvious because obviously Shadow only has one Chaos Emerald, which appears to be the yellow Chaos Emerald from the likes of him since Sonic Adventure 2, but I digress. So let's insert the final Doom Gear to able to actually learn the final Doom Power. Technically, we've already learned that since the very beginning, like I said this before, since in Space Colony Arc Act 2, but now we can able to actually use that ability for reals. So, good lord, man. And now we can able to fly around in places with Doom Wing. Okay, I guess that's what the abilities is all about. So, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's actually pretty cool. And as soon as you're able to actually turn into Doom Wing, something bad was about to happen, and it may look like, oh jeez. Wow, it looks like the entire background is now in pure red and everything. And it looks like most of these obstacles from, let's just say based off from Radical Highway of any sorts, which I'm pretty sure is going to lead us straight down here, which, yeah, and there's going to be a lot of enemies ranging from these gun robots and more black arms, so yeah, I guess we'll have to deal with these for the time being. So, although I'm pretty sure enough though is about the fact you can able to actually do optional stuff here and there. But first things first though is about the fact that we have to go for this whole tutorial thing with all this 3D white space, you know, Doom Wings usage. So, and as you can tell, if you try to able to actually utilize Doom Wings, much like the forms of how it does it for Super Sonic, it actually depletes your rings after a while. So, but either way, it looks like we got to meet up with Maria and Gerald Robotnik again.
Deny me, Shadow. You are finally complete. Come, face me. I shall claim you, mind, body, and soul, and become the perfect being.
this time.
I'm sorry I put you on this path, Shadow, but I'm proud of how you have walked it. I believe in you, son.
Shadow!
It's all right, Maria. I'm letting go of that destructive anger. But I will continue to fight. Fight with your wish in my heart. Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
I will admit, that particular scene is actually pretty cool, how the fact that Shadow actually smiles for once, especially unlike the forms of how he does on the previous Sonic games, where basically sometimes that he just somehow goes into this whole little bit of a temper mood or something like that. So, hard for me to explain, but either way, so as you can see, we're now going to be making our way to the final encounter against with the forms of Black Doom himself. But before we get to that though, we need to go for a serious amount of obstacles based off from Radical Highway in terms of set pieces and stuff like that. And so much so for the fact that we can able to actually utilize with any other Doom abilities, as far as you can definitely tell, like ranging from Doom Morph, as well as the forms of Doom Blast, Doom Spears, and heck, even especially noticeable with the forms of some other Doom powers as well, I could probably think about on top of my head. Well, mind you, it has been about a couple of hours ago since I actually have last played this game for sure. So anyway, let's go ahead and glide, and so much so, after going for that particular dash rings, we immediately dive into the actual stage itself. So yeah, I wonder if it's possible about the fact that, well, as you can see right here, we now have the option to able to actually turn off or on the Doom Wings. So, but for me anyway, I'm also able to actually stick around with Doom Wings for a while, and here we go, on to, presumably speaking of, the final stage in the whole entire game of Shadow Generations, and it looks like this level looks a bit familiar to you, doesn't it? Well, actually, as it turns out, this particular level was none other than, ironically enough, Radical Highway, based off from Sonic Adventure 2, the very first Shadow level in the entire Sonic series. So, makes sense for that regard, especially unlike the forms of how it does on the 3DS version of Sonic Generations, where Sonic and Classic Sonic can able to actually experience Radical Highway, despite the fact that back in Sonic Adventure 2, usually in multiplayer only, not only for the Dreamcast version, but alongside with the Adventure 2 battle as well, that technically Sonic has already experienced Radical Highway before, but it's only in multiplayer. And same applies with the forms of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games in the Wii version for Dream Snowboard Cross. So, and anyway, as far as I've definitely noticed right from the get-go, Radical Highway in Shadow Generations is going to be pretty challenging. I'm not going to lie for saying that. Well, as long as you were able to actually up for the challenge when it comes to not accepting to equip the Doom Wing abilities. So, but ultimately speaking, though, as you can tell, that certain sections does manage to encourage you to do a lot of flying involved. And again, you have to collect so many rings as possible, much like the forms of how it does it for Supersonic skill for Sonic Generations, because otherwise, if your ring counter goes all the way back to 0, this means you're turned back to its normal state. So because of that though, pretty self-explanatory, and also much like the forms of Supersonic anyway, basically though you'll be invincible for a while. So yeah, that seems pretty cool and interesting at the same time. Even though, again, it's very weird about the fact that I don't think it's possible we can able to actually see Super Shadow in action, unless if you want to count the forms of viewing the actual concept arts, but I digress. So, yeah, no matter what though, it's about the fact that for those of you probably wondering, yes, today's date of course is the 5th of February today, in some cases in 2025 today, and so much so for the fact that, well, if you couldn't tell already, the actual Switch sales numbers have recently been updated since yesterday, and as a result, there's a lot of, like, games have been updated for the sake of the actual, sales units, so, which I suppose that particular topic can wait, though, once we're able to make our way to approximately once we're able to get to the next stage after this, because, well, straight to the point though is about the fact that if you couldn't tell already, that every time whenever you go into Radical Highway, it doesn't matter if it's either the actual transition with those 3 stages, both Space Colony Arc and Rail Canyon and Sunset Heights, where obviously though if you couldn't tell, we cannot use the Chaos Control abilities, because as far as I'm aware, same applies with the forms of that particular very unexpected change environment, or in some cases the sky drops for the sake of the forms of 3D white space, because as far as I'm aware though, that we can't use the Chaos Control either, so, but I digress. So, yeah, for the most part, this stage right here is pretty cool to me, despite the fact that obviously though is obviously based off from Shadow's first stage in the entire Sonic franchise, as you can definitely already know right from the get-go, which I was assuming for the fact that they're trying to able to actually bring back one of the levels from Shadow the Hedgehog, like for instance Wostopolis or Lethal Highway, because relatively speaking of that Black Doom or Doom's Eye, we did somehow first met with Doom's Eye during the forms of Wostopolis, despite the fact you have to replay that stage 10 times in a row until you're able to actually access to the true ending of the game of Shadow the Hedgehog. But either way, I should probably point things out right away. As soon as you're able to actually hear multiple drum beats, as soon as you're able to actually see that particular animation right here, that actually signifies you get yourselves the S rank. However though, if it doesn't do that much drum roll or anything, obviously though you get lower ranks ranging from D, C, or B. So much so for the fact that luckily for me, I managed able to get myself my glorious S rank in Act 1. Now compared to Act 2 on the other hand, well, funny story actually, whenever I first experienced this level during the Forms of on the Switch version, I was very close to able to actually get myself my glorious S rank on this stage. Well, that's because of one specific aspect, and you probably already know what I'm talking about if we get onto certain sections of this particular stage right here. So, but yeah, as to be expected, there's a lot of multiple pathways you can able to take, and it's especially noticeable concerning for the fact that if I was trying to do this stage without my Doomwing abilities, basically though, it'll just simply becomes without a doubt as the toughest stage in the entire Sonic series. So, which obviously though is about the fact that we have to deal with a lot of deadly obstacles ranging from shifting boundaries or just any other like enemies that try to throw you off at one point. And not to mention though is about the fact that again, sometimes the actual jumping physics can be felt a bit slightly off at points, but when you get the hang of it though, it's actually not too shabby for the most part. So at the very least, oh whoa, jeez Louise, that was close. Yeah, you see what I mean about the fact that sometimes if you lose control of yourself, sometimes though about the fact that you always have to make sure that timing and precision is key to winning. So anyways, let's get on to this next part right here, that we definitely need to avoid a lot of those water tornadoes, because if you get touched by them, you get pushed back rather than getting hurt. So yeah, this particular thing right here, which appears to be one of those black arm creatures, where basically though, in order to able to actually finish him off, you have to do a lot of button mashing, and then once you're done with that, you can able to progress. However though, there's also the second counterpart of that, once we're able to actually continue our progressioning right here, and most inconsistent thing out of them all though to me though, and that's why about the fact I consider this stage to be one of the hardest stages in the entire game to meet though, are these collection keys. Now, for the most part, the other two is not too shabby for the most part, but there is one particular collection key I always have a hard time trying to able to actually get it in the first place during the forms of my very first playthrough of the game, usually for the Switch version or the Xbox One versions. So, but for the most part though, as you can tell, you have to stay away from his attacks, because otherwise, assuming if you do manage to turn on Doomwings on or off, depending on the forms of your different tastes, for difficulty or challenge, and so much so for the fact that, well, there's going to be a lot of times about the fact that you will tend to fall off quite often, especially if you're trying to go after, you know, all these collection keys all in one go. Although, despite the fact that, as you can tell, I somehow missed one of them. So, either way, let's just get on to this little half-pipe segment right there. Now, that key right there is always a bit of a fickle indeed, which, despite the fact that I was going to try to jump a little bit, while most of the time, though, I ended up missing it, whilst other times, though, is about the fact that it could be something to do with the Foms' very weird movement when it comes to going from half-pipes and stuff. But I would highly recommend you able to actually use the bumper button, so just in case, that way, you don't get necessarily too slippery around here. So, yeah, that particular collection key is pretty difficult to obtain, mainly because of your very restricted movements, and because you'd be on rails most of your time, and so much so, a lot of obstacles around in this particular stage is always feels a bit extremely difficult too, because of hesitation, and similar to the forms of how it does in one of the levels from Shadow the Hedgehog, which appears to be Cosmic Fall. Basically though, there's going to be a lot of times where platforming is going to be pretty tricky with all this spinning platforms comes into play, and not just that however though, that also reminds me of so much of Super Mario Sunshine as well. But at the very least in this game in particular for Shadow Generations, at least you can able to actually take control in midair very easily, unlike the forms of how it does it on Super Mario Sunshine's momentum feels a bit kind of iffy at times when it comes to dealing with the very difficult platforming from time to time. Oh, and by the way, in order to able to actually activate the Doom Wing powers, basically though you have to press the bumpers at the same time, and that way you should able to actually go into the actual fly mode. So, yeah, it kind of reminds me like a similar situation as one of those selectable menus for the likes of not only for Yoshi's Woolly World, but also with Yoshi's Crafted World as well. So, usually, relatively speaking though, if you do have wings with you, obviously though it becomes a lot more easier and such. And there goes my S rank. So instead I got myself my B rank, so that's okay for me, because eventually at some point in the future I can able to actually go back into this stage again to able to actually guarantee to get myself not only a trophy but also getting the forms of a yet another S rank as far as the actual things itself is usually concerned with. So, oh well, no big deal, because then again though, that this entire stage does give you a lot of practice at one point. So anyways, let's get on with Devil Doom from Shadow the Hedgehog. Okay then, so it may look like Devil Doom from Shadow the Hedgehog is going to make a comeback after the events of the last story segment. So, yeah, I guess this is now the final boss of the game.
The time has come, Shadow.
Agreed. Time to sever this bond between us forever.
Now, I have to say about the fact that this particular final boss battle is actually a lot better in comparison to the forms of Time Meter from Sonic Generations, because if you couldn't tell already, as soon as the boss fight starts, obviously that was about the fact that we immediately start things off with Doom Surf, much like the forms of how it does it on Metal Overlord. However, instead of taking place in Journey forms of in Final Fortress, so instead it just somehow takes place in Radical Highway, or technically Westopolis for that matter, which it's hard for me to explain because, you know, as I said before, I'm almost assuming they're trying to bring back the level from Shadow the Hedgehog, which is Westopolis, but that'll be a topic for a later time as far as you can definitely tell. Anyway, so the main premise of this entire boss battle is pretty self-explanatory. Basically though, this battle is divided into 3 phases. So the first phase, you have to simply just try to utilize with the Doom Surf spin attack to able to actually reflect the actual projectiles right back at the forms of Devil Doom. And for the most part, yeah, this part is not that big of a deal. But once we get out to the second phase, if you couldn't tell from that particular cinematic scene, we immediately transport it into the move that we do need to utilize with is Doom Morph. And yeah, you have to go for a lot of platform to platform basically until you're able to make your way towards Devil Doom himself. And then once you do that for about approximately 3 times, then obviously though the battle itself will be over by then, right? Well, there's actually more to it than that, aside from just utilizing with the forms of only 2, oh goodness gracious, I almost go fall off and die, but thankfully though about the fact that there's a plentiful of springs, so yeah, at the very least though, we're actually going to be faced off against with a different foe at the very least, since, you know, back in 2005 from Shadow the Hedgehog, rather than just trying to face off against with Dr. Eggman like multiple times in the past since Sonic Colors, and same applies with the forms of Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World, and especially noticeable with the forms of Sonic Forces, and yeah, you get the idea for that point. So, but I digress. But then again though, the loading curve will decide to able to come into play with the forms of utilizing with Doom Morph, because ever since in Chaos Island, well, obviously that was about the fact I would not recommend you utilize it with the forms of special technique at all times though, because otherwise though, you will get yourself screwed over. And it's also worth noting for too, much like the forms of how it does it in Sonic Generations, there is that particular trophy slash achievement where basically though you have to do the entire boss battle without taking a single hit. So yeah, I can totally see that particular achievement or trophy is going to be ridiculously challenging to try to able to achieve that. So, oh gee, what is going on here? Well then, it looks like we've stumbled across into a much more powerful version of Devil Doom, which appears to be now called Neo Devil Doom. So, yeah, it seems kind of interesting. And obviously, if you couldn't tell, yes, we did somehow immediately turn into Doomwing Shadow, so as a result, we can able to fly through a series of deadly obstacles and stuff like that, to able to actually don't get in your way. It's also worth noting for too, in order able to actually get yourselves the glorious S rank on this battle, basically though, you need to be fast on this, because otherwise, if you waste too much time, you're not going to get yourselves the S rank. So, yeah, basically, in order able to deal with this boss battle right here, or this particular final phase of the fight, Neo Devil Doom, basically though is about the fact that as soon as you're able to try to keep on boosting, which by the way, every time whenever you do manage to boost in Doomwing abilities, basically though, the actual boost gauge will start to refill for a little bit, so just in case you can able to actually catch up. And so much so, much like the forms of how it does it for Metal Overlord for some sections, well, despite the fact you didn't see it during the forms of in a normal mode, because there was technically another difficulty, assuming of course we'll try to show that off at one point. So yeah, in order able to catch up to him for reals, is that you have to keep on utilizing with the forms of that particular spin attack right at the forms of his little blue projectile stuff, because that way it should stun him for a while, and then as soon as you keep on boosting into him, just do a lot of button mashing, and that'll be it basically.
Chaos control. Your future is already decided. We will be one.
And if you're probably wondering, is the boss battles over yet? Well, actually as it turns out, there's only one more thing to take care of, and that's of course, thankfully though, it doesn't require the forms of very strict time limit or anything else like that, so instead, we have to do the forms of this part. Button mashing multiple times, much like the forms of Perfect Dark Gaia from the likes of Sonic Unleashed. So, yeah, I guess that makes it totally obvious about that point, so there we go.
Cannot deny what you are. We are one and the same.
I am Shadow the Hedgehog. This is the destiny I choose. Now, to end this,
you deny me? Shadow,
Okay, so now that Devil Doom is now exploded, instead of just trying to fall to his death, unlike the forms of how he does in Shadow the Hedgehog, but I digress. So, at the end of the day, this is the end of you, and the end to my cursed past, or anything else like that. So, and conveniently enough, I got myself my glorious S rank, so that's pretty top notch, specifically on the PlayStation 4 version. So with that being said, folks, that pretty much does it for Devil Doom / Neo Devil Doom. And let's watch the ending to Shadow Generations. So, I gotta say, that particular boss battle is pretty epic in every way.
Nice work. Perfect timing, too. Sonic is getting ready to confront the monster that trapped us here. If I'm going to switch the emeralds without him noticing, we have to do it now.
Very well. I leave it to you.
Okay. I'll take care of it. Aren't you coming? He might need your help.
I need to settle something first.
Whatever. Shadow? I knew you could do it.
Maria!
I'm okay. Really.
Professor, what's happening?
Without Black Doom's influence, the time anomaly is beginning to heal. We are returning to our own point in time.
I'll stop Rouge. Use Chaos Control. Stop this moment in time.
Shadow? No. I don't want to be frozen in one place in time. Besides, your friends need your help.
But you don't know what's going to happen.
I know I'll see you again. And if fate draws us apart, I will always be in your heart.
Maria. Wait.
Well, I guess that's now the second time that Shadow cries ever since in Sonic Adventure 2. So, yeah, it is very sad at the end because obviously that was about the fact that Maria and Gerald Robotnik are now gonna return back to the point in time, and so much so for the fact that Shadow just somehow has no choice but to go with Rouge and just try to rescue Sonic and his friends and stuff like that. Well, to be more accurate though about the fact that obviously though that Rouge actually now got the real Yellow Chaos Emerald to try to take on the forms of the Time Eater. So I'm guessing it's more accurately for that particular scene alone. It's basically somewhat in between the ending of Sonic Generations or it's hard for me to explain because I sometimes don't understand about the forms of the mid-quel or although I understand about the sequel and the prequel, but in between quills though, that just feels a bit I don't know, convoluted to say the least. So, anyway, so as you can see, much like the forms of how it does it on Sonic Generations, basically though it's about the fact that we got ourselves the actual credit sequence. However though, here's the thing though, you remember how in Sonic Generations that it's pretty cool to see the original game footage has been shown, depending on what levels you've already experienced so far? Well, unfortunately though, that's not the case in Shadow Generations this time, because as you can see, all we got is just still images in the background, and there's no real gameplay footage of the forms of any other past Shadows games, like Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Sonic 06, Sonic Forces, and I can possibly understand why they do not include the gameplay footages on the first place is because of the lack of Shadow's playable appearance of Sonic Frontiers, because, like I said this before, in one of the comments and during that stuff, obviously though the mod does not count, because obviously though it's not official, made by Sega for that particular mod, so it's made by fans alike. So, and so much so, it's pretty interesting about the fact that we can able to actually hear the remix music from the likes of any other levels, from the likes of not only Final Rush or Final Chase. I would classify for saying Final Rush specifically, because Final Rush is definitely a lot more popular in comparison to Final Chase to me though. And meanwhile we got Rail Canyon, and also we got Kingdom Valley, and Sunset Heights, and of course Chaos Island. Now, I know for a lot of people out there got a lot of controversial opinions about the forms of the musical track, for the sake of Chaos Island in Shadow Generations, because, well, despite the fact that it's almost like, originally in Sonic Frontiers, that particular island is almost like an atmospheric look to it, or a lot more ambient when it comes to the musical pieces and such. Well, usually in Shadow Generations though, that's entirely different story. So either way, so let's give my final thoughts of Shadow Generations before we're able to actually tackle through some extra stuff in Shadow Generations. I would say I actually really enjoyed that particular secondary story, or to be more accurate though, the second game, in terms of the forms of this one particular huge combo pack, even though despite the game is pretty short, much like the forms of the original Sonic Generations, but I will say, it feels a lot more exhilarating, because obviously though with multitude of pathways you can take, and not to mention though, using Doom powers is really fun to use, and sometimes again, Doom Morph can give you a lot of learning curves that was required, much like the forms of whenever you first time playing through Sonic Riders for the first time, and so much so for the fact that for the most part, I really do enjoy Shadow Generations as well. So either way, and it's nice to be able to actually experience some of these familiar stages again, apart from a few exceptions, which appears to be, obviously though, there aren't any levels from the likes of Sonic Lost World, because obviously Shadow was not playable in that game either, and also same applies with the forms of Sonic Mania and Sonic Superstars, because obviously though, Shadow was not playable, and he's not around that time in 2D, with all his like 2D sprites, because the last time we actually technically see Shadow in 2D sprites was back in Sonic Battle for the Game Boy Advance, which is unbelievable, like even then though, because concerning for the fact that Sonic Battle did came out like 22 years ago up to this point, so either way though, that's like really asking for the sake of time, so but I will say is about the fact that the graphics, well, usually it runs by Hedgehog Engine 2, unlike the forms of how it does it on the original Sonic Generations, it runs from the likes of Hedgehog Engine 1, and so much so, I will say the graphics in Shadow Generations are really fantastic. And not only that though, about the fact I feel like the soundtrack really does manage to able to get a lot of bangers out there. And the controls wise, it's pretty much great. Not perfect by any means, because there are a couple of times though where double jumps when it comes to doing with 2D platforming can be felt a bit slightly sluggish at times, much like Sonic Frontiers or Sonic Forces. But when you get the hang of it though, it's actually not too shabby for the most part. So, and finally, most notably out of them all though, the story itself, well, it's pretty similar to Sonic Generations, but I will say, it does have a lot more to it than the forms of how it does it from going from stage to stage, and trying to figure out the clues and stuff like that, because I will still say, Sonic Generations story just feels a bit, I don't know, lackluster in comparison to me. But apart from those aside things though, yeah, nothing else to add. So, Oh, and also the honorable mentions for the sake of Radical Highway, the final stage in Shadow Generations, but technically we are not done with any other stages or tons of content for Shadow Generations just yet, because as soon as you're able to realize, once you do manage to actually realize that there's actually an optional thing you can do, or there's actually that particular strange object will appear, as soon as you beat the game for the first time at the very least, because there is technically not only some more collectibles we need to get, but as well as on that though, there's going to be some harder challenges for challenge acts, as well as the harder difficulty when it comes to several boss battles, apart from one exception, which I found was kind of surprising, concerning for the fact that I'm almost assuming they'll try to include that as well on the final boss in the forms of Shadow Generations, but that'll be a topic for a later time, because, well, straight to the point though is about the fact that you can still able to actually recommend playing through Shadow Generations as well, alongside with Sonic Generations as well, because I will say, at the end of the day, Sonic X Shadow Generations is the greatest Sonic game ever to me, well, for a long period of time that is, especially concerning for the fact that that game has been now sold for about 2 million copies sold, which is very, very good. Well, usually depending on what version of the game you're playing at the very least, because, well, straight to the point though, I can totally see why that Sonic Superstars definitely did not sell nearly as well in comparison to the forms of Sonic Frontiers, and even nowadays with Sonic X Shadow Generations, because, you know, the Year of Shadow, of course. Well, it's a shame about the fact that Fearless Year of Shadow has come to an end recently, so yeah, it seems kind of sad on some aspects. So, anyways though, folks, with all that being said, folks, is that we get endings of this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Sonic X Shadow Generations. While we're still playing through Shadow Generations, is that we're about to show you off the forms of the extra content, starting with, of course, some challenges, of course, which is hard for me to explain, but yeah. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.